This is the Devil's Guide to D&D. Devil's Delegate here, and my Wizards of the Coast has been busy little beavers this week, with tons of announcements and new materials. And I'm looking at the big one, the preview to the next edition of D&D. And my first thoughts? This is a 5.1, or maybe a 5.3. That is, they're claiming that the new version of D&D is going to be backward compatible with all of 5e, and yeah, it really looks that way. I don't see anything here which is really going to be a problem with that. Now, backward compatible does not mean it's the same thing. Doesn't mean there won't be some adjustments you have to make. Yes, there will be. But we've already been doing that. Tasha's brought in some big changes that everyone has had to adapt to. And though the changes we're seeing look like they're a bit bigger than Tasha's, it's not that much bigger. So yeah, based on what we've been given so far, the new D&D is going to be backward compatible. Hold on to all those old books. My next thought on all of this, OneD&D is a really stupid name. Yes, we're getting new books in 2024, but they're not going to be called 6th edition or 5.5. It's OneD&D, as they say they're getting rid of editions. Yeah, my phone did that too, and every other corporation that doesn't like to count. This is just marketing, and it's really annoying. Their statement is, there's no more editions of D&D, there's just D&D, OneD&D. Yeah, we've still got to call the different books something. If I've got 3 players' handbooks, I still need a way to designate which one is which. So what, if they make another player's handbook after this one, it'll be OneD&D 2? Anyway, that's all marketing, just something to remind you that these guys aren't your friends, they're a large, faceless corporation, and they figured this is the best way to sell it. Fine. Most of the other things said in the video I'm going to ignore for now because they're just marketing material. They tell us that they're going to have this great online platform for playing D&D. Maybe they will, but we don't have anything on that yet. Yes, it looks like they're coming for Roll20, but they've said all this before, and it didn't work out. So we'll talk about their virtual gaming platform when we actually have something. But we do actually have something. What we have is a preview that they're calling playtest material for how characters are going to work in 2024. So this is real stuff that we can look at, put into play, and actually respond to, as they are calling it an unearthed arcana. So let's take a look at the playtest character origins for OneD&D Player's Handbook in 2024. And there's a lot to go through here, and I'm going to do it in the opposite way that they laid it out. They do this a lot, putting things in the opposite order that I would, and then telling you to go look ahead at things. So I'm going to take things in the more logical order, and start with rules and terminology changes. Then we'll go back up to backgrounds and feats, and finally the races. First interesting change we have in rules is that we're now going to be calling D20 rolls for ability checks, attack rolls, and saving throws D20 tests. I like this. It's just quicker to say. And we've got a few other adjustments to make for our D20 rolling. Firstly, if you roll a 1 on a D20 test, it means you fail. That's not just for attack rolls, but also for ability checks and saving throws. This is kind of old school, and a lot of us were either playing like this or wanted to be playing like this for a long time. Then there's rolling a nat 20, which now is an automatic success, not only on attack rolls, but also saves and ability checks. Great, and if that's with an attack roll, that means a critical hit. And there's some changes to critical hits. The first, and I think the biggest change here, is weapon strikes have a special feature for player characters, critical hits. Meaning that you can get a critical hit. Monsters cannot. I'm not sure if I like that, but it is a thing. Which brings us to new or altered conditions. And for ease, I'm going to start with the new one, which is slowed. Well, new old one. We've had slowed before, and I'm really happy to see it back. I've been annoyed that it hasn't been around, and actually homebrewed my own. So okay, slowed. You must spend 1 extra foot of movement for every foot you move using your speed. Great, half movement, but worded so that you don't get any funky results about when it comes on and off. Like it. Attack rolls against you have advantage. Okay. And you have disadvantage on dexterity saving throws. Okay, also good. So excellent, I think we'll see this popping up in some spells. Which brings us to grappled. Grappled sees a couple changes. First, the grappled individual now has disadvantage on attack rolls against any target other than the grappler. Alright, that generally makes sense. If the grappler is dragging the grappled, he now suffers the slowed condition. This makes it very clear, and wait a second. Okay, so when the grappler has the slowed condition when dragging the grapplee, attack rolls against the grappler are at advantage. And the grapplee's attacks were only at disadvantage against other targets other than the grappler. So this means now if you grapple someone and move them, the person you're dragging has advantage on attacks against you? Ooh. That's not going to work out well. The other big change is that escaping a grapple no longer requires using an action. Instead, it just gets to try at the end of each of its turns. Okay, some big changes there, and at least in one case, I think someone's going to have to work on that. And finally, they've adjusted the incapacitated condition. You can't take actions or reactions. That's the same. But now your concentration is broken, you can't speak, and if you are incapacitated when you roll initiative, you have disadvantage on the roll. Sure. Next noticeable change is for inspiration, and I'm bugged by this. They really needed to change the name of this, but they didn't. So we still have inspiration and bardic inspiration, so that every time at my table it's used, someone can say, well, wait, do I have an inspiration or a bardic inspiration? Okay, I'm adding my inspiration die to, oh no, that's the bardic inspiration. Inspiration just allows you to announce that you're going to have advantage on your next D20 test. They're ramping up inspiration to be something actually important in the game, as opposed to something people always forget. Currently, you get inspiration as a reward for good roleplay from the DM, and players can pass them around. That's still the case, but in OneD&D, the main way you get inspiration is by rolling a nat 20 on a D20 test. You also lose it if you don't use it before the start of a long rest, and I also like that. It encourages people to use it. Inspiration's a nice game mechanic, and I like seeing it become more important. There's a few other minor adjustments to things, but the only one I think is important is tremor sense. Tremor sense is the ability to know where things are by feeling them through the ground. Usually this has been a trait that blind monsters had. The important element of tremor sense here is that it doesn't count as a form of sight. Why is that important? Because there's a whole lot of spells that require sight. So you can't be a blind tremor sense caster. With the rules out of the way, let's dig into feats and backgrounds. And with backgrounds, they're leaning hard into construct your own background, which is what most of us did anyway. Your ability score increases, that is your +2 to 1 ability score and +1 to another, or your +1 to 3 different ones, is now part of your background, as opposed to part of your race. Mechanically, this really doesn't make any difference, not since Tasha's. In fact, I wouldn't have put it in background, I would have just put it as part of your ability score generation. Then for your background, you choose 2 skill proficiencies, 1 tool proficiency, and 1 language. Before we had the option of 2 tools or of 2 languages, but now it's 1 tool and 1 language. That's fine. Here, however, is the big difference. Choose 1 first level feat. So in those little few words, we get the biggest change for the game. As I predicted in previous videos, everyone is getting a feat now at first level. And second, there's such a thing as first level feats. So feats are now leveled. All feats are not available at the same level. The one thing I am sad to see go is the old features for background. You know, things such as if you were the acolyte, you got free lodging with your church. I actually use those a lot in my game. Suppose it didn't need to be spelled out mechanically. Still, I'll kind of miss those. We'll skip over the sample backgrounds because they don't really mean anything. You build your own. Instead, let's take a look at those first level feats. There are 10 of them. And if you're thinking, well, they're all going to be the weakest feats, no, not necessarily. There's some real winners on this list. We'll start with Alert. Alert's gone through some changes. The Alert feat used to give you a +5 to initiative. It now gives you a plus to your initiative equal to your proficiency bonus. At most levels of play, this is way, way weaker. I mean, math. 3 is less than 5. The old alert feat also gave you a couple other features that were completely unimportant and nobody cares. But the new one has a second part, which is initiative swap. Immediately after you roll initiative, you can swap your initiative with the initiative of 1 willing ally in the same combat. So does this make the new alert better or worse than the old one? It really depends on your party makeup. In the right party, this could be a big buff. However, for any party outside of solo play, this is going to be more fun. Our second feat is Crafter, and this is what we call a garbage feat. No one's going to be taking this. Mainly what it gives you is 3 artisan tool proficiencies. And boy, they're going to have to do some wild changes to the game in order to make 3 artisan tool proficiencies worth anything. Let's face it, if you were looking for tools, it wasn't artisan tools you were looking for. Thieves' tools? Yes. Tinker's tools? Not so much. But then it's got 2 add-ons, which are just terrible. Discount. Whenever you buy a non-magical item, you receive a 20% discount on it. And fast crafting. Whenever you try to craft something using your tool proficiency, how often does that happen? The required crafting time is reduced by 20%. If you actually are crafting things in your game, are you usually doing it when time is an important factor? These are just terrible, and any bard with persuasion is going to do a better job of discounting their prices than this. Next is Healer, which has been rewritten. It was a bad feat before, and it's still not good enough to take. The number of healings on a single creature had been capped at 1 between rests, while now the cap is a number of hit dice, since the wounded creature spends its own hit dice when healed. I like additional ways to use hit dice in the game, and being able to heal a damaged colleague multiple times is an improvement. The feat also lets you reroll 1s when you are healing, which includes spells. If you're a caster and that concerned about your healing that you're willing to take a feat, you'd be better off choosing one of the multiple druid or cleric subclasses that do a better job of buffing healing. So, healer? Well, it sucked before, and it still sucks. In a game with pretty much no healing magic, this is okay. In a normal game, this is kind of terrible. I'd take it over Crafter, though. Bringing us to our next feat, which is Lucky. And what the hell is Lucky doing as a first level feat? It's one of the best feats in the game. And looking over this whole document, I'm getting the idea that Wizards of the Coast doesn't consider rerolls to be nearly as powerful as I do. So okay, Lucky, which is going to be your default choice for a feat. Alright, you have luck points, but you no longer have just 3 of them, you have proficiency bonus number of them. That means you have less of them at your first couple levels. After that, you have the 3 you expect, and it can go up. This actually makes Lucky more powerful than before. After all, most people weren't taking it at first level anyway, so the fact that it's weaker at first level, not terribly important. So yeah, Lucky becomes better. Kind of. There's a couple changes to wording. Your luck points aren't just letting you reroll anymore. Rather, they're giving you advantage on a roll immediately after you roll a d20 for a d20 test. So you can have advantage after you roll the die? That's new. Okay, I can see why they wanted the wording like this. This means you can't use luck anymore when you've already got advantage. But it also stops some weird situations with disadvantage that people were calling having super advantage because basically you got to choose from having 3 die rolls. By making Lucky give you advantage, even if it is after the die roll, that means if you had disadvantage before, you can use this to cancel out the disadvantage instead of giving you an extra roll. Yeah, that's not as strong, but it's nearly as strong. And in 99% of cases, it won't change anything. Now, the other alteration is that when a creature rolls an attack roll against you and you use your luck against his roll, that now imposes disadvantage. That seems like a nerf to this, but one, note they didn't say if that's immediately after the roll. Well, you're going to say, well, they don't have to say that because disadvantage doesn't work that way. Grant it before the roll. But apparently that's not true anymore. We can have advantage after the roll now, so I assume you can have disadvantage after the roll. So it's not clear, but the bigger reason this isn't a nerf is if you recall, monsters don't have critical hits on you anymore. So it's not like you're saving your luck point for when someone had a crit against you. Overall, I'd say Lucky has gotten a buff at higher levels of gameplay. At lower levels, minor nerf. It's still one of the best feats in the game. I like what they've done with it. It's all good. Which leads us to Magic Initiate, which I like to call the feat you take if you're not taking Lucky or Alert. Magic Initiate was a great feat, and now it's a greater one. They've made exactly the changes to it that I expected them to make. That is, they updated to work the same way you expect things to do after Tasha's. You get 2 cantrips and 1 spell. And now for that spell, not only do you get a free casting of it, but you can also cast it with spell slots, which, depending on the spell you choose, could be a big deal. And that's a nice adjustment. Also, you can choose whether you want to use Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma for it, instead of your ability score use for the spell being pinned down by what class you take. So that's all a big buff for this feat, and it's the expected one. Perhaps a little less expected is that you no longer choose a class that you're taking your spells from, but rather you're choosing a spell list. That is Arcane, Divine, or Primal. Hey, we're getting terms back from 4th edition. Okay, what's Arcane, Divine, and Primal lists? Well, pretty much what you think they are. They list them out here at the end, which is Arcane spells are your wizard spells, or wizard, sorcerer, warlock. Your divine spells are your cleric spells, also figure paladins in there. And your primal spells are your druid spells, and also figure rangers. A few interesting things to note from these lists. They're only including spells from the player's handbook that may cause some DMs to only allow these specific spells that are listed here to be ones that you can take with Magic Initiate. And if so, that's certainly going to weaken Magic Initiate. However, this document doesn't say that, and so there's no reason why you can't include the spells off of Tasha's or Xanathar's. You just gotta figure out which spell list they belong on, and that's pretty easy. The Bard-only Vicious Mockery does belong with the arcane spells, and notice that Eldritch Blast is on no lists, making me think that there's a good chance that Eldritch Blast isn't going to be a spell anymore, that they're going to turn it back into being a Warlock feature. As far as what you choose, things haven't changed that much. You're choosing Primal only for the same reason you'd ever have chosen Druid before, which meant to get Goodberry. Divine you went for to grab Guidance, and then either Bless or a healing spell. And Arcane you go to if you need an attack cantrip, and otherwise this is where you get Find Familiar or Shield. I like everything about this, and it has certainly buffed up the spell. And this has one big effect on character creation, which is races that give spells are no longer as important as they were before. I mean, after all, at first level, anyone can take this and get themselves 2 cantrips and a spell. For bards and sorcerers who are desperate for a few extra spells and cantrips, particularly bards for the cantrips, they no longer push toward races that grant that because they can just go here. You want your bard to have an attack cantrip? Take this feat at first level and he's got it. Your sorcerer just need an extra spell? And unless they're Tasha's sorcerers, they always need an extra spell. Then here you go. So definitely devalues a couple races just a touch. Okay, then let's continue on with the feats that you're probably not going to take because the 3 good ones we've already gotten to. Next comes a new feat, Musician. This gives you a tool proficiency in 3 musical instruments. Okay. And then it also allows you, after a short or long rest, to play your musical instruments and give everyone an inspiration. Not a bardic inspiration, but an inspiration. Wizards of the Coast have specifically said that this is not stepping on the toes of the bard. Of note, this is stepping on the toes of the bard. Is this a good feat? Well, it's not a bad feat. Certainly it's nice to get an inspiration. Remember, you get an inspiration if you roll a nat 20. So the more rolls characters do, the more likely they are to already have an inspiration. So, yeah, this isn't bad. I would have certainly preferred something other than just 3 musical instruments. At least give a proficiency in performance. But okay, not terrible, but it's not in the league of those top feats. Next is Savage Attacker. It was around before. It's pretty much the same. They've altered the wording a bit, but it does the same stuff. It wasn't okay, but not good enough to actually take feat before, and that's still true. Then there's Skilled, that's the same as before, a feat I only really liked on rogues, and nothing changes. Next comes Tavern Brawler, which used to be a half feat, not anymore. Like before, it changes your unarmed strike to being a d4 instead of just a 1, and you get to reroll damage rolls when you roll a 1 with your unarmed strike, which is new. In the old version, you could attempt to grapple someone when you hit them. In the new version, you can attempt to shove them away. Shoving is generally worse than grappling. And the final feature is Furniture as Weapons, which replaces being proficient with improvised weapons, which makes me think that we are no longer going to have improvised weapons as a thing in the game, of which I have mixed feelings for. There wasn't really a good rule for improvised weapons before, but having no rule at all for how you do certain things always makes me a little nervous. So now when someone picks up a bottle in a bar, there's no longer a rule for what that bottle does. By the way, your furniture counts as either a great club or a regular club. Our final feat is Tough, and it's the same as it was before. It's good before, it's good now. It's not a top 3, but there's certainly some builds that will at least want to look at this. And yeah, those are our 10 first level feats. You will get one of them, no matter what you build, and I kind of love that. I do hope that they have some minor adjustment to a couple of these, but overall, a nice grouping. And that brings us to what they put first, and that's our races. And the first real noticeable change we have with our races is there's no half races. Half elves and half orcs are gone. Instead, they're dealing with what they're calling children of different humanoid kinds in, well, what we'll call a not particularly useful way. If you want to be half one race and half another, then you simply choose one of those to give you all your mechanical stats, and then you can choose the flavor from both. So if you want to play a half-elf, it's an elf. But then you can say, but my ears aren't pointed because of my human side. Or your half-elf can just be a human with pointed ears. This also means that you can have a half-human, 1/4 elf, 1/4 dragonborn. The thing about all that is, that's not actually mechanics. That's telling you how to run your flavor. And I really don't like it when they tell me how to run flavor. I can do that on my own. I can allow my players to change how their characters look any way I want. If one of my players runs a human, but wants the human to be polka dotted, I can give that to them if I want. That's just flavor. It doesn't make any difference to the game. We don't need rules for that. This is a non-rule. All right, it's fine. And we start with humans, which are pretty much variant humans now. The old humans are gone, And since our new humans are the variant human, this is automatically a buff for them, since the penalty for getting that extra feat at first level was you got less for your ability scores. That's not true anymore, since ability scores are in backgrounds. So all humans now getting a feat at first level. By the way, this is worded as you get the skilled feat or another first level feat. Well, I guess it's good to give a default. I think it's probably better to just word this as you get a feat and figure people are intelligent enough to choose one. But alright. You also get one skill. Great. And you gain an inspiration whenever you finish a long rest. I mentioned inspiration is going to be more of a thing. Here you go. You can see that in a party of all humans, that musician feat, which gives out inspirations, is going to be a little weaker. Final thing to note for humans is that they can be medium, 4 to 7 feet tall, or small, 2 to 4 feet tall. This, by the way, makes humans capable of being shorter than dwarves or gnomes. Next, we get our new race. Yes, we've got a new one. It's called the Ardling. They're new upper plains beings. And they look like humans with animal heads. Think Egyptian gods. There's some flavor tossed in. Don't care about flavor. Again, medium size or small, but their small can only go down to 3 feet. All right. Actual features, they have 2. Angelic flight, which is not flying, it's jumping. Pretty sure a monk recently got the same thing, and I believe there's a barbarian with this. They get to fly, in quotes, during their turn, at the end of which they need to be back on the ground or they fall. So they get a really good jump. So this is nice if you need to go straight up, and you've got something to hang on to when you get up there. But it's also nice in that this is a bonus action, so it is extra movement that you get to use proficiency bonus number of times. It's not bad. And then you get spells. You choose your celestial legacy, exalted, heavenly, or idyllic, and they suggest which animal heads you stick on which ones, but you can stick any animal head you want, since again, it's flavor. The spells, you can choose Thaumaturgy, Divine Favor, and Lesser Restoration, or Light, Cure Wounds, and Zone of Truth, or Guidance, Healing Word, and Animal Messenger. Okay, well, since everyone can now choose Magic Adept and grab a couple cantrips and a first level spell, this is definitely weaker than it would have been before. All the more so because these are not a great grouping of spells. Zone of Truth and Animal Messenger, not spells I'm usually dying to grab. On the other hand, Guidance is a really good spell. So 90% of the time I expect anyone to go Idyllic to get Guidance and Healing Word. I mean, Light's a fine cantrip, but would I really choose Light and Cure Wounds over Guidance and Healing Word? Never. Just never. I wouldn't even bother comparing Zone of Truth with Animal Messenger because who cares? This is a pretty decent race, and that bonus action movement is nice, but I can't say I'm really excited about the Ardling. Next, we have the Dragonborn. We just had an update to the Dragonborn in Fizzbands. Why aren't we using that Dragonborn? It wasn't overpowered. It was good, but not one of the great races. But now they've dialed it back, with this Dragonborn being much closer to the old player's handbook Dragonborn. And while they've adjusted the breath weapon slightly for damage, it's still not a very good race. They've gotten rid of all the gem dragon stuff that Fizzman's brought in, and they've decreased your choices with breath weapons such that it only gives a 15-foot cone now instead of being able to do a line. Honestly, you wanted the 15-foot cone anyway, so that's fine. You do get dark vision, so that's a buff from the original, though not from Fizzman's. And unlike Fizzman's, but like how it was in the player's handbook before, your breath weapon takes an action, meaning Dragonborn become lousy melee combatants after your class gets extra attack. So yeah, this Dragonborn is ever so slightly better than the original player's handbook one, but it's not very good, because the old one wasn't very good, and I don't really understand why they didn't just use the Fizzbins one. Okay, dwarves, which cannot be as short as humans. They've got dark vision, dwarven resistance to poison, dwarven toughness, so they get the extra point. They get forge-wise, which means they get a tool proficiency. It's all good. What's notably lacking is the weapons and armor you could pick up with a dwarf before. Pretty much why you were taking a dwarf, but you could also manage from the old dwarves to get up to 4 points of ability score increases. Can't do that anymore. So in general, the dwarf is nerfed, but we knew that was coming. They're taking away the intrinsic weapons and armors from any race. What they've given in its place is Stone Cunning. As a bonus action, you gain Tremor Sense out to a range of 60 feet for 10 minutes. Does this make up for the lack of armor and weapons? Maybe. That's pretty good for the right kind of build. If you can set it up that you're fighting a lot in darkness, this can be very good. My dwarf builds would now be looking to have a bit of magic, some way of casting darkness, but wouldn't necessarily want to build pure spellcasters on a dwarf because, as mentioned before, Tremor Sense is not a type of sight, so you can't use it when you're casting spells. Bringing us to elves. And we still have 3 types of elves. We get the normal elf stuff that we had before, so dark vision, keen senses, that is perception skill, fey ancestry, so that's advantage on saving throws you make to avoid or end the charm condition. Great. And you get trance, which means you don't need to sleep and magic can't put you to sleep. And here we go again. We just had changes to the elven trance. It just happened. They had just changed trance so that it gave us some rotating proficiencies in Monsters of the Multiverse. And now they're changing it back. Didn't they think about all this when they made Monsters of the Multiverse? Did they not know this was coming up? Hadn't they done any planning for this? I expected changes in the new books. I didn't expect them to undo changes. But okay, so trance is back to the way it was before. Okay, then you get to choose your elven lineage. Drow, High Elf, and Wood Elf. And what this basically means is spells. They all give you a cantrip along with a spell at 3rd level and 5th, and these spells follow the new rules. So you get 1 free casting of the ones at 3rd and 5th level, and otherwise you can cast them with spell slots, and you can choose Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma as your casting. Great. Definitely a bit of a buff for all of these. For Drow, it's Dancing Lights, Fairy Fire, and Darkness, which are the 3 that the Drow was getting before. Drow's also getting Dark Vision increase to 120 feet, and you'll note no longer having sun sensitivity, but we knew that was happening. They're getting rid of sun sensitivity for any player race. The High Elf gets Prestidigitation, but can swap it out with anything from the Arcane list after a long rest, Detect Magic, and Misty Step. And while this is a step up, and finally the Wood Elf gets Druidcraft, Longstrider, and Pass Without Trace, along with a 35-foot speed increase. I've always liked Drow magic, but of the 3, it's certainly the loser now. But as always, it depends a little bit on your build. Maybe you really want darkness. But of the cantrips, clearly the High Elf is way out ahead. Prestidigitation alone is a good cantrip, but the High Elf isn't getting that. It's getting anything it wants whenever it wants it from the Arcane spell list. So if it needs an attack cantrip, great, it's got one. If it doesn't, choose something else, and the nice thing is that versatility of being able to swap them in and out. So if you're not fighting for a while, but you really need to fix your wagon wheel, pick up Mending. Detect Magic is fine, but Misty Step, of course, is the one to get. So High Elf coming out way on top. The Wood Elf, Druidcraft is even weaker than Dancing Lights, and Dancing Lights is at least fun, and you can do some cool things with it. Druidcraft is just Longstrider, pretty unexciting. Pass Without Trace, on the other hand, can be great. It's a really good spell. You do run into the situation that only one person in the party needs Pass Without Trace, whereas everybody in the party is good with Misty Step. So if no one has Pass Without Trace in the party, then the Wood Elf is a pretty good choice. If anybody else has it, then the High Elf, again, is clearly the winner here. Next is Gnomes, who also get to keep lineages, even though the Deep Gnome was already split out in Monsters of the Multiverse. Note, Gnomes are small, but only down to 3 feet. So again, humans shorter. They still have Dark Vision as before, they have Gnome Cunning as before, which is why you play a Gnome. Advantage on Wisdom saving throws, plus the others, is simply fantastic. And then you choose if you're Forest or Rock. If you're a Forest Gnome, you get the Minor Illusion cantrip. Fantastic cantrip, and since everyone can choose magic at up to 1st level, not quite so exciting to get it through your race, but it's a good cantrip. And also get Speak with Animals, which you can cast proficiency bonus number of times per long rest, besides using spell slots. Boy, I haven't been in a game where you want to cast Speak with Animals all that often. I suppose in the right game, it's good somewhere. Oh, let's be frank, Speak with Animals is not the spell that you're dying to get a hold of. Rock Gnome gets Mending and Prestidigitation, and before they could make tiny devices, well, they still can, but now it's tied in with Prestidigitation. The Gnome can make up to 3 devices that do one of the effects of Prestidigitation. I like that they tied those together. It's nice and neat. This probably just means you're going to have 3 lighters that you hand out to your party, although Flame Extinguisher is nice. I rather like the idea that you hand out 3 very small washing machines. Okay, the lineage stuff is fine. I'm going to edge toward being able to take Minor Illusion if I'm not grabbing it some other way, simply because that's such a good cantrip to have. But again, you choose Gnome for Gnomish Cunning. That's still here, making the Gnome still a great race, and still a top choice for any kind of magic caster. Next we have Halflings. And here we finally have a race that can be as short as humans. They still have Brave, they still have Halfling Nimbleness, they still have their Luck, where you get to re-roll a 1 on a d20, which is a really good ability. I've been shocked playing a halfling how seldom it's come up. I guess I just roll good dice. And then they have naturally stealthy, as in a proficiency in the stealth skill. There are no longer different lineages of halfling. I prefer in concept to have the different lineages. In practice, this is all good as is. And then we have orcs. Yes, they've added orcs because they got rid of half-orcs. So if you want to be a half-orc now, you're basically an orc, and you make yourself look a little bit less orcish. Unlike for Dragonborn and Elves, they have not undone anything with orcs. The orcs we get here are exactly the same as the one they just published. So, Adrenaline Rush, give them a dash action as a bonus action and some temporary hit points, Dark Vision, a higher carrying capacity, and Relentless Endurance, so when reduced to 0 hit points, they're actually at 1 hit point. I appreciate the no change. And our final race is Tieflings. They can be small or medium, again not as small as humans, still have dark vision, but now they have legacies. Now Tome of Foes gave us bloodlines for the Tieflings, and a lot more of them. The legacies we've got now are Abyssal, Chthonic, and Infernal. And what they give you is like the Elf or Ardling, they give you spells that function the same way those spells do. And in this case, your resistance. So for Abyssal, resistance is poison damage, spells are Poison Spray, Ray of Sickness, and Hold Person. Chthonic, your resistance is necrotic, your spells are Chill Touch, False Life, and Ray of Enfeeblement. And Infernal, resistance is fire damage, and your spells are Firebolt, Hellish Rebuke, and Darkness. Firstly, this is a buff from the old Player's Handbook version, though not necessarily from the Tome of Foes versions, simply because you have versatility. Next, it's also a buff because Infernal is now getting Firebolt, so we get an attack cantrip. And for some classes, that's going to be a nice boost. Again, everyone can take Magical Adept, so it's not as big a boost as it would have been before, but your average bard is going to be really happy with it. Of course, your average bard is probably going to be taking Magical Adept, so, well, I suppose if they take Tiefling, they don't have to take Magical Adept. Hellish Rebuke and Darkness were the spells before, and they're still fine. What I'm not as thrilled with what they built here is that Abyssal and Chthonic are so clearly inferior to Infernal. Ray of Sickness is not a spell I ever look for, and Hold Person is pretty situational. You've got to be fighting persons, and is only really good on a class that's able to reduce the saving throw of opponents, so I guess for one free casting a day it's fine, but I'm not excited by it. I'm certainly not excited by Ray of Enfeeblement, and False Life, sure I'd cast it, but again not very exciting, and Chill Touch, I sure would rather have Firebolt than Chill Touch. Plus, the resistance to fire damage is going to be better than necrotic damage or poison damage, so you've got a clear best choice here, when what you're choosing is pretty much all for the same situation. I would have really liked it if they'd taken a look more at those Tome of Foes versions and given us, for the legacies, some spells that would be for different kind of builds. That is, give us the Social Tiefling, one with Friends or Charm Person. Not better spells, but different kind of spells that might be useful in different circumstances. Or the Sneaky Tiefling giving us Minor Illusion and Disguise Self and Invisibility. But just looking at the old Player's Handbook Tiefling, this is a boost, and since everything's backward compatible, you can still use those Tome of Foes ones, so they're still around. Alright, so what's my final thoughts on all of this? I like it. They did a nice job here, and generally this is an improvement over what we've got. All the changes are not the changes I would have made, but that's fine. They haven't hired me. Some of the changes I really like. Both getting feats at first level and that our feats are now leveled, I think are great changes to the game, and I'm very happy to have those. And for the most part, the races are an improvement over what we had from the Player's Handbook. Again, I'm not thrilled with them changing things and then changing them back, but if I'm just looking at Player's Handbook to Player's Handbook, we're good. So yeah, I encourage people to play test with these and then see what you like and what you don't like. I'm not really encouraging everyone to send in their feedback, because the last few times people have sent their feedback into Wizards of the Coast, it's come off really badly. This is why Strixhaven kinda sucked, and why no one gives a damn about Healing Spirit anymore. But I'm likely to send in my feedback. And that's it for now. Some big and exciting changes, but not too big. So go ahead, dig in, and let me know what you think in the comments below. And hey, if you're coming out to DragonCon over Labor Day, drop by and say hello. I'll be speaking there as well as running a track. And I'm always happy to talk D&D.